At this point, it is my honor to introduce our opening keynote, Kim Coco Iwamoto. Kim Coco is a trailblazing activist, attorney, and politician, widely recognized for her contributions to civil rights and social justice. Born and raised in Hawaii, Kim Coco has dedicated her life to advocating for marginalized communities and has seamlessly blended her legal expertise with her passion for inclusivity. We are so grateful that she was able to make time in her busy schedule to join us today. Aloha e Kim Coco.
Aloha. Thank you so much, Caitlin, for having me. And let me start by thanking the Hawaii Library Association and the Hawaii Association of School Librarians for putting on this conference and giving me this opportunity to learn more about your world and the opportunity to share a little bit about mine. And special thank you to President Karina Chernesky and to President Caitlin Ramirez for all the hard work you put in, all the many emails that we sent back and forth. I really appreciate it. It takes a lot of work to make it look this simple. And I have to say that I attend quite a few conferences, and the platform you've created are you utilizing, and the accessibility, I really appreciate it. Thank you. And I like that you tied into an online format, a social opportunity in person, because one of the great things about going to a conference is having those side conversations in between breakouts and in between, and sometimes missing a breakout because you're so engaged in a discussion with a peer. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. I also want to start by giving a shout out to the librarians who've shaped my world and my life. From Hanaha'oli School, Mrs. Loftus, and then from St. Louis High School, Mr. Neff, and then now the state librarian who shapes my daughter's life, Mrs. Akamichi at Queen Ka'ahumanu Elementary School. Thank you so much for all the guidance and safe space that they've created for both of us. So I'm going to start by talking about how my identities have shaped me. And I just off the top, I think they've made me more resilient. And by the end of my presentation, you might also think they've made me scrappy. But to begin with, one of my identities growing up, obviously being Japanese American in Hawaii, I didn't understand at the time my settler identity here, but stories that my mother shared with me about her internment she's from California. She was born and raised in California. So like many Japanese American families on the continent, they were interned. She was in Boston, Arizona. And so was her whole family. And so she would tell me stories growing up about that experience. And it wasn't anything because I think there was a lot of people and cousins who didn't have a mother or a parent who had that experience growing up here in Hawaii. So I just took it as a very, just her sharing her own personal experiences with that. The playing together, the bathroom situation, which was really humiliating for her and her family. Just the sleeping in horse stalls, all of that was very. But there was also moments that she would share of joy and just a childhood. You're just resilient and you just try to make the most of it, right? Even though you're basically imprisoned behind barbed wire. So growing up with that was a very intimate kind of identity that wasn't shared outside. And that stayed with me, that feeling of injustice, that feeling of how could this happen in view of everyone. Actually, that developed as I got older. But growing up, I had four brothers. I ended up going to St. Louis, which is a Marioness all boys school, and it was there. I was around 12 when the school said, "Hey, wait a minute." St. Louis said, the counselor said, "You're not like the other boys here," and so they actually. Thank God, the counselors at the time were, educated about the word transgender wasn't used then; it was transsexual. But they basically said, "Oh, you're not, it's kind of like the sort of the ugly duckling. You're not this, you're actually this." And so they really created an opportunity for me to be my authentic self, as much as I could be in that way, in that environment, but I didn't feel like it was something that was negative. They didn't say you're trans, you have to be kicked out. They actually let my parents know. So at the age of 12, my family went to family counseling on this issue. And thank God that he sent me to the right counselor, or we all went to the right counselor, because the counselor basically said, listen, let's get real here. Kids like Kim Coco are challenged by, society. And so what we need to do is make sure Kim Coco feels loved and supported. Oh, and just to clarify, there's a lot of people when I do presentations think that my name Kim Coco was a name that I chose, and it was actually named that my mother chose when I was born. I was born. My mother went into labor at the Coco Palms Hotel in Kauai, and so the owner of the hotel, Mrs. Gussander, actually asked my mother to name me after the hotel, which is how I got Coco, and my mother just stuck Kim on there. The counselor was basically like, you need to make sure there's this that Kim Coco won't have suicidal ideation or won't feel overwhelmed by your child's experience growing up in this world. And so my father was amazing. One day he picked me up from school, which was unheard of. Like he never did that because he was always working, and my mother was more of the caregiver. And he basically said what my mother couldn't say because my mother had more struggles with it. He basically said, hey, you know what, whatever you choose to be in life, whether it's, you're a garbage collector or a bus driver or a doctor, a lawyer, a man or a woman, whatever you choose to be, I'll be 100%, I'll support you. And I was able at age 12 to get that kind of affirmation. It's kind of like I wish all of my brothers had that, like every kid gets that kind of affirmation at such a, excuse me, at such a pivotal time in their life. I think that would be really important. I'm literally getting choked up and I didn't expect to. Um, so that shaped, the way I looked at my own journey. And of course, when you're probably who you are at age 12, you're going to face a lot of people who are uneasy with that kind of comfort, where they see you and they see your strength as a repository for their internal struggles. And so, of course, but what was so interesting, and maybe this is also part of what one of the teachers at the time was a Latin, he taught Latin, his name was Brother Schmidt. He would say, when somebody's attacking you and pointing their finger at you, just remember there's one finger pointing at you, but three pointing back at themselves. Like that was the indication. So yeah, that kind of, you know, stabilizing, affirming message from a parent goes a long way. And I would argue that that would be important coming from almost any adult, hearing that or seeing that kind of affirmation. Hey, I see you, you're different, and it's okay. Like you're gonna be fine. It really is to me the one significant thing that really gave me an opportunity to excel and not internalize different things around me, which was awesome. And what's really funny is when I grew up much years later, and I thank my dad for sharing this with me, this affirmation, he had no memory of it at all. He was like, I didn't do that. And what I realized was it was the therapist told him he had to do that. And so he did it. And he didn't even, so he didn't even remember because he was just doing what, he's this Japanese conservative businessman. He's like, oh, the doctor said I need to do this. I'm going to do it. So I'm not even going to remember that I did it. But it doesn't even matter because the impact was so profound for me. So the other identities that I had was working in I grew up, went through high school. I wanted to be a designer. So I went to New York, applied to one school, which was FIT, the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City. And contrary to what I would tell any young person, I did only apply to that one school. And I'm like, okay, it's either I get in or I don't know what I'm going to do. But I did get in, and I did graduate. I had a degree in fashion, excuse me. and I got a job in the fashion industry. And one day, my boss, we had a, and I by that point I had fully transitioned into my female identity, and I was working. And one of the I transitioned basically. I kind of transitioned during FIT during college, and so one of the buyers that came into the showroom of the design house I worked in recognized me, and then it turned out that she told her boss, who was the buyer for this huge department store, and then that boss ended up calling my boss um, at her home to let her know that I was trans and she wasn't comfortable working with me. My boss at the time told me what happened, and basically then began to create to basically, it's called constructive termination, to the point where I did not feel like it was a comfortable place for me. And it kind of blew my mind that yes, it was, 1990, and we're at a different time today. But it blew my mind that in the fashion industry in New York City, that I would be discriminated against. My father had a business. I worked all through high school at the company. My father, again, conservative Japanese businessman, he had no problem hiring a trans woman and putting her in a supervisory position. Like it wasn't just, we didn't even think about it. So growing up, I didn't think that being trans was going to be seen as a deficit to any company. So that actually got me thinking I need to do, and so I went to see an attorney at the time, and again, this is in 1991, 92, and they told me you have no protections. The laws are here to, and this is even again in New York City, the laws are here to protect employers. They could sue you if you say something about them. And I'm like, wait a minute, I mean, she can legally fire me for just being who I am. And it made me realize that the laws need to change. So I went to law school. I got a degree. I became an attorney. I helped to change a lot of the civil rights laws here in Hawaii. But there's a lot I left out, unfortunately, because of my emotional thing. I know we have a few more questions to get through, and I will weave in some more of my identity stuff into the other responses I share. But thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, your origin story. And, as a parent and a teacher, I really admire and am impressed by the educators and the people, the parents in your life who were able to recognize you and support you on your journey. And I know that we have a shared goal of really providing that acceptance for the children and the adults in our communities, and allowing everybody to really be their true authentic self, and how important that is for our communities to be whole. So I'm interested in hearing, and I think we'd all love to hear about some educational initiatives that you've been involved in your current professional life that aligns with that theme of nurturing growth and connections and supporting identity.
Right, thank you. So I think there have been two that I've really kind of focused on during my time on kind of connected to the Board of Education, and now as my time as a business owner. The two are addressing bullying in the schools, and then also today it's addressing homelessness. And there potentially are some crossovers in that work and in that focus. Um, Obviously, the problem is at the time, and this is when I got elected to the Board of Education in 2006, bullying was a big issue. I had been on a task force to address bullying in the public schools for 4 years prior. So that's from 2002. And the initiative took quite a while to basically come up with recommendations. But one of the recommendations was that this is not a zero tolerance. The solution to bullying in the schools isn't about zero tolerance and basically criminalizing and creating a school to prison pipeline and treating people like they're criminals, but actually intervening with an educational kind of approach. But at the time, it was just so interesting. When I got elected in 2006, I would go to the board meetings as soon as even before getting elected, and I would watch the board members who were already on the board. One of them was reporting back on bullying, and he went to this conference and he left some materials in the back. But then, because he was part of the prosecutor's office in his past history, he kept saying that, oh yeah, we need to have zero tolerance for bullying. And then I'm like, wait a minute, the materials you brought back said zero tolerance doesn't work. What are you doing? You have the materials that you didn't even read that you brought back. So we got to, and which was consistent with our recommendations from the task force. So really, it's about seeing all parties, the perpetrator as well as the receiver of bullying, as individuals who needed healing and then building of self-worth and resilience. So looking at every incident and every infraction or every conflict or every subtle put down as an opportunity as educators, as adults in a space where your young people are, stretching and trying to learn and figure out who they are, to basically, intervene a little, sometimes subtly, sometimes more immediately, but to intervene and to address the hurt that might be caused or hurt that might be revealed in that. So understanding that expelling a student for repeated harassment or bullying, the bottom line, what happens is you're basically that expelled student who's now completely marginalized from any educational intervention now becomes a harassing, later on in life becomes a harassing coworker, who potentially could become, right, if you keep harassing, you're going to get fired, you're going to get unemployed, and it's going to be harder for you to get a new job. So then the person becomes a person who can't have an ability to provide for their own needs. And so that person, what happens in that situation is they may engage in behavior that is deemed criminal for just trying to fulfill their own basic needs. And then Honolulu went through this whole sit lie phase. So just existing as a homeless person on a sidewalk would get you, criminalized as well. So there's all of these layers and layers of that kind of criminality that we need to address, that so it spills over. There is this kind of continuum of this approach of expelling and just marginalizing the bully. And I think a lot of people are oftentimes surprised that I talk about this and talk about this approach. Because I think the presumption is I would be like, no, we need to create an absolutely safe space for, especially like LGBT students, but for any marginalized community. But yes, we do. But yes, we also need to, we do that by also doing wraparound services. And that takes money, And so one of the things that on any kind of solution that government gets involved in, we have to acknowledge it takes money. And that's, during the Furlough Fridays, it was very evident how much money it actually took to create, to provide education, let alone address the social emotional needs of, perpetrators and victims of bullying. But it does take money. We owe it to them. When you look at huge public works projects like the rail and other projects, there's money out there, and it's just how we prioritize raising and spending and investing that money into quality education, quality public libraries. All of these issues are really important and come down to that. So addressing then homelessness. So as an attorney in Hawaii, my first job was working with the Volunteer Legal Services Hawaii. And part of my duties included doing legal clinics across the state, including homeless shelters. So I found the volunteer attorneys to staff the clinics. Obviously, there's going to be lots of legal challenges that somebody in a homeless shelter might be trying to deal with or might be happening to them. So making sure that they had those services accessible to them was really important. And in Hawaii, we have this, well, across the nation, we do a point in time count where volunteers and social service providers actually approach every single unsheltered neighbor on the street in every single neighborhood across the state. And you just talk to them and you ask them a series of questions on your phone, and that data gets collected. So we know for Hawaii, it's around 6,000. It's been pretty consistent over the past couple of years. It's been 6,000 unsheltered individuals. You don't actually, in that number, you don't count those who are in a shelter or in prison or in the hospital, because in theory, on that one night, they actually have a roof over their head. But so actually, you would think that the situation is even worse, but it's not insurmountable. It's not that we cannot provide. We could, because on the other side of that, which is ironic, at the U.S. Census, it recorded 9,000 vacant habitable dwellings across the state as well. So we have housing. We're just misaligned in who's not getting let into housing. So going back to the my awareness of people who are unhoused was back in when I was living in New York. I was volunteering and then working at a community center, serving. I was actually an adult facilitator to the longest at the time LGBT youth-run youth group, and in this group we had kids who were very affluent, had private jets in their family, and kids who were also, unhoused. And I remember one story from this one kid who basically, he was from somewhere in the middle of the country, and he came out to his family, and his father was a cop, and the father said, "When I come back, I don't want to see you anymore." And so the mother quietly slipped him $100, and he left and he went to New York City, where of course he didn't know anybody. He could only basically engage in his own human trafficking just to find a warm bed, just to have a shower, all of that. So there's a number of reasons, and doing the point in time count, you're actually able to see whether, like, why somebody's unhoused, like what led them to this. Many of them, it's surprisingly the numbers, it's like 19% experienced homelessness as a child. It's generational potentially. So it just builds these data points, really, for me, build a more compassionate argument for not seeing them as criminals, but it's all of that, which I know that you as professional library service people know on the day-to-day what's happening. So the other issue is that, so knowing what's going on, and that's what led me to actually hearing this young man's story, is what led me to go into getting licensed as a foster parent, because I knew that there were queer kids who were kicked out of their families and on the street here in Hawaii. So I did get licensed to be a therapeutic foster parent, and I had parented during that time 5 different LGBT queer identified teenagers, one at a time, because that would be impossible if they were all in my house at once. So it's one at a time, and I did get to hear more about, and many of them had experienced homelessness, had experienced been forced to get addicted to crystal meth, had been pimped out by their families. I mean, so it's like a lot, So when you understand the struggles that they have and when they become adults, and I'm still in touch with all of them to different degrees. It's been around 20 years now, and since I had that role as a foster parent, because my time on the Board of Education, there were moments where I would say goodbye in the morning, and by the time I got home from a Board of Ed meeting at 1 in the morning, back in the day when we used to have long Board of Ed meetings, I would come home and they would be sleeping, and I would not see them at all. And it would be like, I don't think that this is what it's supposed to look like, when you're a foster parent and a teenager who's alone and not seeing anyone, and then they come home and they're alone. I don't know. So I decided that that wasn't the best fit for me. So when the last one actually chose to leave, I'm like, okay, I'm going to try to find other ways of helping, which I did by purchasing an apartment building And my apartment building now houses, it's small, it's like 7 units in the Ala Moana area, but more than 50% of my units house previously homeless families. And also, we accept Section 8, which is something that keeps homeless families or keeps families from slipping into homelessness. Section 8 housing subsidies are really important. Again, these are solutions, whether it's temporary shelters, whether it's Section 8 vouchers, it does take money. We need political leaders who are going to prioritize not just giving tax credits to large developers to build affordable, fake affordable housing, but to actually provide, housing vouchers to people, whether they're, currently unhoused or slipping into homelessness. There's other ways that we can make developers pay their taxes and use that tax money, or make empty house and people who invest and keep their homes empty because the price of housing keeps skyrocketing in Hawaii. And so just keeping it vacant, selling it in 5 years, they make double the amount of money, and yet they put nothing into the community. So taxing them at a higher rate and then using that money for subsidies. So there's all these solutions that are really important, and they are solvable. There are answers. It's just, and this is why I get involved in politics. This is I'm really putting pressure and trying to move that forward and give people the courage, or to do the right thing, or give them cover to do the right thing. Because if somebody is there trying to get your seat and you turn to your major donors, you're like, oh, I have to do these bold moves that you're not going to like, or you're going to get that socialist who's running against me to get elected, and you're going to really hate that. So that's all for me. It's all a really important tool in my toolbox of social justice. Yeah.
I appreciate when you mentioned, the furlough Fridays, and also recently, I think the pandemic as well. I think what that highlighted as a teacher and a parent, was that these kinds of organizations and services are sort of invisible in the regular times, but when they disappear, it's very evident how much our communities need and depend on these systems. And as you say, they're not going to exist without continuous investment of money, investment of energy, investment of attention, and it's really critical that we continue to do that so that our community can, be whole and healthy for everyone. So I think that that was for me, that was a really clear sort of explanation too about how you have leveraged your identity to help the community and help marginalized communities. And I wanted to move forward a little bit in our discussion. You have been involved in professional spheres and political spheres. Can you describe how you see the intersection of identity and advocacy, and thoughts about what role libraries and librarians can play in advancing inclusivity in both our community and our political process?
Yeah, thank you. Well, one of the important things that I feel that identity helps in moving things forward is about authenticity. Authenticity builds credibility, right? When somebody is secure enough to bring their authentic self to a space, to a conversation, there's a little bit more trust in what they're sharing and in their argument. You become a stronger advocate by being more true to yourself. You have an ability to be present and engage, and a lot of solution building. Moving forward does take a degree of trust, and that expression, moving forward at the speed of trust and all that. But it's true. So the best advocacy I find involves storytelling, and the best testimony includes a story giving a story to the person who you're trying to persuade to move something forward. And I feel like librarians are at the intersection of storytelling and reference materials, incorporating narrative with data, and I think we take it for granted, but that is the magical role. I feel like that is in your toolbox as like professional librarians. So those are amazing advocacy skills to have available. Um, Interesting. So the one of the things and the whole idea. So can I just was this question number 4? Because I'm kind of lost. Did we skip a question?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's
We did
okay.
skip a question.
No,
My
that's all right. Because
apologies.
no, that's okay. I just numbered them, and I just wanted to make sure I was giving the correct response.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, okay. So my question was, in my head, I'm thinking, are libraries like Switzerland, are they supposed to be neutral spaces? Was Switzerland neutral, or was it just a silent accomplice? So I don't know. It's kind of like there is this kind of feeling that libraries should be neutral ground, because there's one kind of the edict is to make sure libraries are safe spaces for everyone, right? And that's really important. And that's the whole point of, I think, the theme of this is how do we welcome every identity and every experience, and even though they might be disparate and disagreements, that it's important to make sure everyone feels welcome. Um, but so what is the role of an advocate if you're neutral, if you're creating space? What do you advocate for? What is the advocacy? And I actually think, and I underscored it into my previous responses, the best advocacy starts at home. And so for me, it was about advocating for civil rights for LGBT people in Hawaii. And that's where I started, right? And that's where you get your most successes are going to be starting closer to your lived authentic experience. So what is your lived experience as a librarian? One of the things that we need to, I think, fight for, I mean, you have to ask for yourself, hey, do we need to fight for more inclusion? Do we need to fight for more books? Do we need to fight for more open hours? Do we need to try to fight for a system that welcomes volunteers to carry the load? Do we need to fight for more just financial resources from the lawmakers who are charged with raising revenue? So these are these are the questions that you ask. What do we want to fight for? What is worthy of our agita, of our passion, and the social capital we might expend by being vulnerable, right? Because if you go to the fight with your authentic self, it does get scary. You can lose friends. You can have internal conflicts. All of that. What are you giving up, and is the fight worth it? And is it the right role for you? Because I don't think that everyone should be. If you don't feel prepared, if it's going to put you in a position where you're not safe. And my earlier response had to do with that idea of, is it a safe space for you to be an advocate? Is your leadership at your institution, are they providing a safe space for you? Are your coworkers providing a safe space for you? Are you providing, you know what I mean? So there's this layer of, you're taking a risk as an advocate, you're trying to push something forward. Is it truly safe? And I talked about being the chicken or the egg in terms of what's going to be safer, or like, how can you provide a safe space when you don't feel safe? And I think that we need to seriously look at that and say, well, is it really safe for us to discuss these controversial issues in these ways? So that's something. One of the things also I wanted to to talk about is how can we make a library experience more affirming, right? And I think, though, affirming to who? And again, I spoke about competing diverse interests. So right now we're seeing a lot of discussions and attempts to ban books. So what's the difference between banning a book and not selecting a book for your collection? Because you can't have all of the books printed. You're making a decision. So it's about also taking this kind of politicized thing, and actually saying, well, we do have to make a decision. And I'm not saying it's about it, it's equal. It's not equal. Banning books, it's a conscious a response to somebody having a reaction. So actually, I think maybe possibly is looking for alternatives to mitigating those fears, short of banning a book, to how do we have those discussions to say, hey, parents, hey, a politicized, Board of Ed member. And I don't really feel we had that here in Hawaii. And let me just preface that. A lot of the things that are going on the continent, um, I don't know if we're seeing all of them the same way, experiencing them here. Again, for instance, Hawaii in 2006 became the first state to elect an openly transgender person to a statewide office. And I feel it's really important to recognize where we are, because I've actually seen advocates try to take a conflict from the continent and bring it into Hawaii as if we didn't resolve a lot of these issues and tensions, which to me is not always the right choice. And specifically, I'm referring to this drag queen story time that I've never seen here in Hawaii until after it became a hot button issue on the continent, became a site of conflict. That's when then some local people were like, oh, let's do drag queen story time to just rub it in people's face. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, that isn't authentic to what we were doing before. You're only picking a fight because it's titillating to a certain kind of person. And often that person is going to be somebody who just arrived here in Hawaii from a hot button state. And really, do we want them to set the tone of what all of our attention is going to? And secondly, think about all the trans-identified teachers, administrators, librarians who are living their authentic self as gender transitioned people, who now, when the whole turmoil around drag queen storybook reading, because it turns something that into a frivolous kind of debate when there are real people. Because the attacks on the drag queen reading books to children is gonna really bring it home and give ammunition in some weird ways against the administrator or the teacher who is trans and legitimately teaching the kids. So I'm like, we need to be really careful about the tactics we use to confront some of these issues. And that's okay. So now going back to book banning. Sorry for that little side thing. Is it, I mean, to actually begin the dialogue, to say, hey, what is it about this book that you want banned? Is it a word? Is it a person? Is it a described behavior? Is it described violence, sexual violence? What is it that you're afraid of? And also the question is, are those things existing in the news? So the news issue is, yeah. So how do we censor the news and what gets on? And so one of the things I think is really important that I do with my daughter when we looked at some TikToks together, and when they're mean TikToks, like TikToks that make you look because somebody's almost getting hurt or falling, there's this kind of meanness to it. And I actually say to her, we're skipping that one. It's mean. That one's just based on mean. You know what I mean? And I'm giving her the language of her own censorship, to give her the tools. Like mean. Like, you see that? It's gonna go lead into a mean thing, or somebody's gonna get hurt, or somebody's gonna be made fun of. You just don't give it any time, and you just keep going, because the algorithms are tracking whether or not how long you stay on something mean, and it's gonna give you more mean. And so don't, no, just keep it moving to, but giving kids these tools on how to address some of this. And I would argue that that's the same kind of tools that we can offer to people who want to ban books, to say, hey, listen, we can't make everything bad disappear, but we can shape how we respond, or the context, or the comparisons. I think that's really is, so to be able to talk to them, And to say your fear, okay, let me understand your fear. What is that about? Where's it coming from? And oftentimes you're going to find out that the person who's trying to ban a book has actually, it's all not even authentic. It's not even a real health thing. They're just, grandstanding on some of these issues. Um, yeah, so that's my response.
In your response and your discussion of, censorship and book banning, what I'm hearing is an echo of your earlier comments about bullying and zero tolerance, and the idea that we can't just isolate the person who is engaging in that behavior and push them sort of out of the community, because then that creates another marginalized population. And so we need to be really thoughtful and careful in our interactions and in our decisions around programming and around policy making, so that we can allow the greatest number of community members to be included and to have access to, community resources and to the community itself. So I appreciate that consistency, through these different issues, and that you're always looking for ways to be inclusive. And I think that's something that librarians also really strive for. So we're moving towards our last question right now. And, as you know, this is Hawaii Library Association's 101st year. And as we embark on this new centennial as an organization, how might libraries contribute to shaping the future positively? How can we ensure that we remain relevant and impactful for the next generation and beyond?
Right. Okay. So as a library lover, but recognizing that I am not a professional. I did not dedicate my life to library services, and I feel like it's kind of not my place to tell you. Those of you who've been doing this for decades, I'm truthfully, it's like you tell me how I can support you and your visions, and I am there with my toolbox of advocacy skills. But with that said, so I do and want to answer this question with that kind of true humility to don't listen to anything I have to say on this issue, because I will always defer to the lived experiences of librarians. With that said, for me, I mean, what have libraries, and when you talk to anybody, what does a library feel like for somebody, right? It feels like there's this kind of ordered stimulation, right? Because every single book is stimulation, right? But it's ordered. It's like Dewey Decimal System. It's shelves that are lined up. Everything feels so comfortable and serene, and that's beautiful. And that calm tranquility, the quiet. But it's also a portal to information and escape in the same way, So all these concepts of calm, serene portal. Then there's a question that you guys always have to deal with: is it a site? Are libraries a physical space, or are they a service and people and where it's about people and people connecting with people, people offering services? And so this is a struggle, and we saw that struggle play out during the economic recession of 2008 when the budget was slashed. Where did the state librarian, at least for Hawaii, were they focusing on more book buying books, or were they focused on keeping libraries open? There was all of this forced scarcity that resulted in hard decisions, but very interesting, and kind of like you put your money where your true values are, where you see that money going is where the values are. So that's very telling, and I think we should pay attention to those kinds of choices made at the top, and what our role is as people who may be in the middle, or in guiding, expressing what you feel, where you feel those assets should be allocated. But just seeing in my short lifetime of using libraries how they've changed as a user, In terms of when I was at law school, this is kind of right when LexisNexis was starting and everything being digital, all the law books being digital, all the law cases, everything's digitally accessible. But prior to that, the law libraries in certain jurisdictions were public libraries. And so a lot of attorneys would use the library collection. There would be a lot of physical presence in there, a lot of people with a lot of law books on tables. Now, with all the technology, we're seeing less of that. So what takes its place in the vacuum? Ebooks, even our digital subscription, all of these things that we can get now. So are libraries becoming Wi-Fi hubs? And if so, and if we're saying, oh, people need the Wi-Fi, because many of you probably pay like around 60 to $100 for your internet connection in your offices or in your home. And that's a huge expense for families living paycheck to paycheck. So they need Wi-Fi. Do we want to cut Wi-Fi off at a certain time when the library's closed? We turn it off so people can't use Wi-Fi in the parking lots or nearby, or sit on a table near the library and tap into the Wi-Fi? Or do we want to go completely the other direction and say, hey, we have libraries in every neighborhood. Let's buy some internet connectivity package that we gift the whole community, like all this Wi-Fi access, and save this whole community money that's not costing us much more than our own subscription, like buying it bulk rate across the state as a state system, a state university system, there's all of these solutions. But again, it's like, well, what is the role? How do we feel about our place in the community? So I don't know if people are having these discussions, but I think that there's two different ways of looking at this, like because I know some libraries would chain off the parking lots at night because people were parking their cars in the parking lot to use the Wi-Fi of the library and then leaving litter. You can't monitor, you can't keep the parking lot safe at night if there's no security. So I get that there's some logistical stuff happening, but there's also there's two directions to go in, right? Like keep it, turn it off, or expand it, leave it on all the time. So these are things to me that we'll need to kind of unpack and think about, and then you as the people on the front lines can advocate. One of the other things that I noticed is a lot more people sleeping in libraries. And maybe I just noticed that during law school because we all slept in the library, especially during the end of the semester, right? Because you go to school, you leave your home, you go to school, you're there in classes, you're writing, you're researching, you're doing all your papers, your exams, and you just have to take a break and sleep. Is there a difference as a librarian when you see a sleeping graduate student or a sleeping kid versus a sleeping adult who happens to have a piece of luggage with them? Like who's sleeping in the library? The reality is, I think a lot of people now sleep in libraries. It's quiet, it's air conditioned. What do you do with that, right? Is that like, oh my God, you're violating the whole mission of the library? But I don't know. So these are things that, again, I know you guys struggle with, right? And then, I've heard stories on National Public Radio about how libraries become safe places for people who are unhoused. And then you're not discriminating against all unhoused people, but then you're like, oh, but what about the unhoused person who comes in with open wounds and, they smell of urine or feces and they're sitting on furniture. And I have to say that I actually know what that's like, having one of my foster kids as an adult. I realized that they were in Thomas Square Park sleeping for months. And when I realized that, because they were we would see each other once a month as an adult. And I found out later that they were actually in the park and they would pretended to not be homeless because they didn't want me to feel disappointed. But when I moved her back into my home as an adult, I said, okay, stay with me for 6 months and you go get a job or volunteer and I'll give you a stipend and we'll put a savings account aside, whatever. But in doing that, her volunteer job was cleaning out a no-kill dog shelter. But it was weird because she never wouldn't want to take a shower. So she just smelled really bad all the time. I get it. I get having, that kind of experience in your space. And yeah, so I've lived it, I get it, but there's still the question of how do we approach it. And I didn't kick her out for not bathing because as she pointed out, that wasn't in our contract. I'm like, but you, before, when you were living at the park, whenever I saw you, you told me you showered every day in the park and you put your clothes on the mock orange hedge to dry out. Anyway, so yeah, so these are issues of how do we care. And then there's this feeling of willing suspension of disbelief, in terms of, do we not see the open wounds coming in through the doors? Do we, I mean, because looking like if I came into your library and I had an open gash, wouldn't you show concern like, do I need to call somebody? Do you need help? Should I call the ambulance? Yeah, there's this kind of thing. But then when it's somebody who we think lives that lifestyle of open wounds as a normal thing, then we think, oh, it's more gracious and more welcoming not to see it. Oh, there is a dilemma, right? This is a hard thing to do, and I struggle with that as well. But again, these are all questions that at some point you guys are answering, or it's going to change. Yeah, so this is why I'm like, it's not for me to say. I mean, it's really for you guys to tell me what you guys have figured out, weighing all the possibilities, all the solutions, given all the templates you've researched, and you just call me as an ally, and I'm there with you. So thank you so much for this opportunity to spend 45 minutes together. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think what you highlighted really in great detail is the complexities of the job and the organization, and I appreciate you seeing that and honoring that. So thank you. And I just want to say it's been such a pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you so much for being here with your whole authentic self. And I hope that everybody in our audience also enjoyed this and enjoys and finds value in the rest of today's activities as well. And thank you so much again, Kim Coco. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.